First on BBC One.
Hello fellow explorers and welcome to episode 29 of the History CV of Britain. I'm your host Paul, and this evening I'll be talking with Melissa Campbell about forbidden archaeology. Really looking forward to it. I just want to apologise to everyone, and particularly to Matt Apocalypse, for the end of last week's show where everything that could have gone wrong went wrong with my equipment. I actually was dealing with a screen that was completely frozen towards the end of the video and nothing would work. So thank you to Matt for putting up with that and doing a great show with me. And apologise for that, but these things happen from time to time. Right, a quick catch up on certain things. Let's start with books. So I was about a third of the way through this, The Coming of the Saints, and it's been pretty enjoyable so far, although the author, John William Taylor, actually conflates the characters Arviragus and Caractacus, which, as we know now, is a mistake. They were two individual characters. So these anomalies do turn up from time to time when you're pouring through all this history, but I'm still looking forward to finishing that. I've stopped reading that and gone back to this book, Adrian Gilbert's The Blood of Avalon, which is the follow-up, the sequel to The Holy Kingdom, because I will be going to Penshurst Place in Kent with the author, Adrian, in about 2 weeks' time, I think it is, 10 days, something like that, because it's one of the key locations mentioned in the book. So we'll be walking around the grounds, around the church, in the main building, and I'll be asking Adrian some questions and hopefully getting some really interesting footage from that location. So that's one to look out for. I'm very excited about that. I will just mention one more book this week because I've talked about it or referred to it 2 or 3 times in the past, and I've never been able to find it in my home, but it turned up recently. Now, I did read this about 15 years ago, possibly. So Irish Wisdom Preserved in Bible and Pyramids. The author down the bottom there is Conor McDarry. Now, this was written and first published in 1923. And it's a very interesting book. It's kind of like a little bit like Conwyn's Beaumont's research on the Bible. So some of the partial contents mentioned here are the problem of the pyramids, the struggle between Rome and Era, the Bible, an Irish book altered and adapted by British Roman transcribers, the Irish Pope Kings, formerly the rulers of Britain, Rome and the pagans, Hebrew, a sacerdotal dialect improvised from the Irish language for the secret use of the priests, going into Egypt, the 4 pyramid group and Sphinx, designed and erected to symbolize man, the mystery of the Sphinx and the problem solved, and finally the Great Pyramid of Iesa, spelled I-E-S-A. Very interesting name. So as I say, I did read this a long time ago now, but I did really enjoy it. If I remember rightly, the author goes into etymology a lot and explains that a lot of old words come from the Irish language, and that the Irish were the first civilization to circumnavigate the Earth and teach lots of other cultures various things like sciences and philosophy and religion and art and all that sort of stuff. So it's a very good read. How much of it is true, it's hard to say. Okay, where was we? Okay, the Wednesday Wellness Show on my other channel, Nutrient Nirvana, it didn't get censored this week. It didn't get taken down. So I'm celebrating that fact. So we couldn't have been too controversial. We discussed, now, the aim of the show is to take a health ailment and to offer lots of natural solutions to that problem. So it's very much a solutions-based show. Now, last week, episode 8, we covered incontinence. Yeah, so I can hear one or two of you sniggering at the back there. But it's a very serious problem. It turns out that 1 in 5 Brits, which is 14 million people, suffer with some form of urinary incontinence, which is staggering. Apparently, it was 1 in 80 people prior to the last budget. Must try stand up. Brilliant. Okay, right. Last thing to mention is I made a video with Orgulug. Sorry, I keep calling him that. That's the name of his channel. His real name is Richard Johnson, and he's extremely knowledgeable on Arthurian history. And we had a great time. It's an informal chat, really, talking about King Arthur, Wilson and Blackett, the best sources for researching that information. And he really knows his stuff. So I'm going to be uploading that, I think, on Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock on this channel. So look out for that one. It was really great to get Richard on camera and be able to ask him questions. Now, one last thing I want to mention before I bring Melissa on. I recently watched a video on YouTube. It was all done by artificial intelligence, like the picture, the voice, everything was all AI. So I'm not going to refer to the channel. But in the video, they mentioned that when St. Augustine came to this country on behalf of the Roman Church, I think in the 6th century, he visited Glastonbury and found the wattled church that was supposedly built by Jesus when he came to Glastonbury. And he built it as a dedication to his mother, the Virgin Mary, a wattle temple. Now, apparently, St. Augustine discovered all this, visited Glastonbury, and wrote back to Pope Gregory at the time and told him about all this information. I've tried to verify this information. I've not had much time to do it yet, but I haven't come up with anything so far. So if anyone knows of or can back that information up with anything, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop it in the chat box. Talking of which, there's quite a few of you that have joined us this evening. Thank you very much for joining me. Please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can also hit the notification bell underneath here somewhere, so you'll get notified of all my future content. And the next one up, as I say, is on Tuesday. So good evening, Merlin's boy. I'll mostly be feeling energy nodes. Good stuff. Okay. Orgulug, talking of the devil, there he is. Evening, Richard. David J is with us. Good to see you, David. Hugh Evans, evening, Hugh. Hope you're well. The wonderful Marshall Abrahams is in the house. Good evening, Marshall. Let's see if I can find anyone else as I'm scrolling down. Andrew Christie, thank you for joining us as always, Andrew. Love reading your comments in the ideas room. Good afternoon to William GB. And it wouldn't be the same without John of Tadley. What ho once more, indeed. Hope you're well, John. Another of our regulars, Robert Paul Corliss. Good evening, Robert. Hope you're well. Meg W is with us. Blimey, there's a few people here. Okay, brilliant stuff. Right, I've waffled enough. It's time to bring on my guest for the evening. Mercurial Pathways Melissa Campbell, who's an amazing researcher and has a really good YouTube channel and a great website, which is full of her articles, which are Really, really good reads. And if you're into this stuff, ancient history, metrology, and all that jazz, her website is a fantastic resource. Can't recommend it enough. So here we go. Without further ado, please put your hands together for Melissa Campbell. Hello.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone.
How you doing? All right.
Yeah, really well. Thanks. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm just really pleased you've agreed to do it. Okay, so going back, so we're talking tonight about forbidden archaeology. Now, I first came across that term when I read the book of the same name by Michael Cremo, probably about, again, a long time ago, many years ago. So how would you define forbidden archaeology, and why are people so quick to reject alternative views, Melissa?
Well, I also came across that term in relation to Michael Cremo years ago, but then it resurfaced last summer when I went to a conference in France, and somebody called Jean-Pascal Ruby was giving a talk at this conference. So it was all about alternative research in ancient world, what else? And this guy is a psychiatrist from Switzerland, and he was there, and he's an absolute complete history buff, loves ancient Egypt in particular. And his take on this question is, as a psychiatrist, why do people continue to reject some of the incredible work that's being put forward? Why do they discount it? Why do they ridicule it? Why are they threatened by it? Why is there talk of conspiracy? Why do some people, even within academia, sometimes lose their job or don't get published? There's a lot of dogma, but there's also, it's interesting from a psychological point of view. So we're kind of departing a bit from Michael Cremo, because in his case, it was about, yes, something definitely about being forbidden. So there's a sense of censorship and dogma, and you can't get past certain things. And in his case, it's all about Darwin and trying to think about maybe the human story being much, much older than it's usually given credit for, and discounting evidence. But what all these things have in common is that when evidence is found that doesn't fit the mold, it's discounted or ignored or destroyed, perhaps. Who knows what's going in the vaults of the British Museum, if there's anything left now after it's all been sold off. But it's a really interesting question. So I thought it would be interesting to have a look in terms of an independent researcher, and also my background through academia in philosophy. So I kind of am interested in that sort of perspective. Why do people reject this independent work that's going on? It's actually fairly recent, as in, if we're looking at the broad spectrum of human history, it's only in the last century or so, century and a half. And I have a quotation here that I found in an article that's actually written by an archaeologist, a German archaeologist called Stefan Maeder, who actually was at that conference also. It was really fantastic. It's this French independent researcher called Quentin Leplat organizes one or two conferences every year.
I've seen him on your channel.
Yeah, he's really good. Howard Crowhurst kickstarted a whole thing in France. He's huge. And I mean, deservedly so. He's really good. And then Quentin is absolutely huge as well. And he has done some incredible stuff. And they found loads of stuff about how the meter existed not only in medieval structures, but in ancient structures. Anyway, it's really good. So he hosts these conferences a couple of times a year. He's actually built like a purpose-built thing in the center of France. And so that's where I was. And so this quotation comes from a paper that was given by Stefan, the archaeologist, the German archaeologist, and it's by a French guy called Alfred Francois Devoir he's kind of, his life bridged the 19th and 20th century, so a good while ago. He says, few archaeological hypotheses have been able to become certainties, too numerous on the other hand, those which passing into the state of dogmas constitute serious obstacles to progress. And that pretty much sums it up. And he died in 1926. So already this was a thing. Few archaeological hypotheses have been able to become certainties, too numerous passing into the state of dogmas. So I think that basically is what forbidden archaeology is all about. Now, there's also this term pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology. it's applied to lots of things actually. Pseudo, very much in relation to Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales. So it's much broader than just ancient history and independent research, actually. But since we're interested in ancient history from an independent point of view, that's what we'll focus on. And Stefan actually wrote an article about his attempts to get people to listen to him, because he actually is an archaeologist. Now, the paid work that he does is actually in relation to weapons. And it's actually, ironically enough, through these ancient weapons that he asked himself, why do I keep finding the Big Dipper on these Japanese swords? And then he got drawn into the whole astronomical side of things. And so in his free time, he studies megaliths, mostly in Brittany, also in the UK. And he's actually doing very well for himself. He's going to conferences, people are listening to him, but it is difficult, it is a struggle. And he wrote in his paper, one of the current prohibitions of thinking in archaeology on the Neolithic in Brittany consists of ignoring or rejecting any approach which would take into account indicators for targeted observations of the sky as factors for the placement, construction, and decoration of places of worship and funeral facilities. And what he's basically saying here is we need to look up. We have to stop looking at always what did they eat, or what did they wear, how long did they live, what did their teeth tell us about their state of health. We can also say something about what they believed in and what they were looking at in the sky from, if we have an understanding that in the Neolithic, people were actually quite smart. They weren't idiots, actually. And if you kind of like start off with that approach, then you can actually read a lot of information from the stones, including stuff about astronomy. And that's another part of this problem of forbidden archaeology, is that astronomy isn't a thing. But actually, astronomy must have been absolutely massive for them. You know, they looking at the sky, they didn't have TV. Not only was it something to look at, they were really, really good at marking time, the passage of time with astronomy. And then to answer your second question a little bit already, why do people ignore it? Well, going straight on to the second question, it is a really tricky one to understand. But I think that maybe for this one, we could maybe go into philosophy a little bit, and we could go to, say, Michel Foucault in the 1970s in France, and to ideas about truth and power. So basically, who is in power? Well, we know that this idea of like the people who win the battles tell the story. History is written by the people who won the battles. But this is also happening at the moment to a lesser extent, and the battles being metaphorically this research. These regimes of truth, as Michel Foucault used to call them, it's about accepted truths within a particular society or institution. And that truth is produced by virtue of multiple constraints, and it induces regulated effects of power. So,
brilliant.
I don't have to go too deeply into that, but it is about power.
Yeah. Okay. I don't like to get. I'm always reluctant to get too political on this program, but people that have no concept of their past, I would say, are far more easy to manipulate. I'll just leave that idea there. We are a species with amnesia, as they say.
Well, I forgot to mention the great Graham Hancock, but obviously he's the, well, I was going to say patron saint, but he is a massive figure, and of course absolutely hated by the likes of Wikipedia. He's a pseudo-archaeologist, and that's another interesting thing. He never said he was an archaeologist. He's a researcher
or a scientist,
a journalist. He describes himself as a journalist, an investigative journalist. He's a writer. But he's described, especially through Wikipedia, as a pseudo-archaeologist.
I suppose one of the positive things at the moment is that ancient history and megalithic sites have gained an awful lot. They've become a lot more popular over the last, well, since the internet, I suppose,
Yeah.
came into being, and and sites like YouTube and stuff. So that's a promising thing, I suppose, is that it's gaining more and more interest now.
Yeah, this is why we're here. And as Marshall said a couple of weeks ago, it's a golden age for people like us. And it was once before. I think if you go back to a much smaller pool of people to work with, but if you go back to, say, the 18th century, 19th century, there were people who were very free, who were able to write books and not be constrained by maybe the same kind of pressures that people are under today in academia.
Yeah, so in a way, it's kind of like the best of times and the worst of times, isn't it? Really, it's a strange time to be.
I've got an image of us getting our heads cut off now.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, fingers crossed. The way things are going, you never know. Okay, so let's get into alternative history now. So, what are some of your favourite theories around, say, Stonehenge and Avebury and Silbury Hill as well?
Well, there are actually so many really interesting ones, because a lot of the conventional theories that I know of, and I'm not actually an expert on everything that's being done in conventional academia, is that, for example, to take the case of Avebury, this is a cattle market because we found cattle bones there, and that's it. There's not much going on. So I think that's kind of annoying, because it's almost disrespectful to the people who built this place. It's incredible to think that these stones are so difficult to move and to maneuver and everything. And of course, people acknowledge that, but then they don't acknowledge the fact that actually there's symmetry there. There are measurements, there are units of measure, there are actual particular numbers of stones. So I guess the first person we should probably acknowledge is Alexander Thom, because he started a lot of this sense of taking the megaliths seriously. And he studied hundreds and hundreds of megalithic structures, I think not so much in Ireland, but all across Britain and then France. And he said things like, what I have a quotation here actually: "As the investigation advanced, it became evident that I was dealing not with the monuments orientated for some ritualistic purpose, but rather with the remnants of a scientific study of the moon's motion. When this is recognized, it will be found that a great mass of material falls into place." So there are two things that are interesting here. One is he's talking about this idea of ritual, and it's kind of almost like an in-joke that if you don't know what it does, it's ritual, in terms of archaeological finds. But again, we're coming back to astronomy, because there seems to be an idea that's very popular in the mainstream that the Neolithic had nothing to do with astronomy, but actually this is the key to unlocking everything. And the moon in particular is really, really difficult to understand. So then people think, well, there's no way we can understand it. Even Newton struggled to understand the moon. So it is really, really hard. And so he's
too big, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt you. It's too big, the moon.
Too big, yeah.
Our
exactly.
moon is way too big compared to other planets' moons.
Well, there's so much going on, because it has actually grown slightly smaller since, say, the time of the dinosaurs, but it's so complicated because there are loads of things affecting its movement. So it's not just that it goes around our Earth in a certain number of days. It's because there's the eclipses that happen, so you have to take into account the draconic month and the draconic year. So these two lunar nodes that it goes through. There's also the gravity, and there are other very small effects that can be found in the moon. So and affecting the Earth. So it is really complicated. And if you are aware of just some of these cycles, like the Saros cycle, the Metonic cycle, you're just aware that they exist and that there are numbers attached to them, like 19, for example. And then if you look at the stones, you might actually be able to find some connections. So that's one place to start. Now, Alexander Thom looked at loads and loads of different circles, in particular Avebury, but he really, his work goes all over the place. Another person whose work is absolutely incredible on all this is actually Stefan Meder, who I mentioned earlier. He has done some really interesting work on Stonehenge, for example. Now, let me see if I can share my screen very quickly for this. Hang on a second. Where is it?
Sorry if you can hear Popeye the Sailor Man in the background. That's the ice cream van outside my house. I forgot to shut my windows.
It's summertime. Yeah. So I'm just sharing here. I don't know if you can see a paper from by Stefan, and I just have an image here. He's got an aerial view with a LiDAR scan of Stonehenge, and he found that, now this is just one aspect of his work, but just pass over it very quickly. He found that if you look at the structures all around the main circle, which is here, it's in the shape of a very well-known ancient symbol. And this is representative of procession and also God itself in many cultures, actually all over the world. Sometimes associated with Nazi Germany, unfortunately, as well. But it's a really ancient symbol, and it's a really special symbol. It's also still very, very popular in India. And so here it is. Here it is. And it's all about, there are different interpretations on how it relates to procession, but it's probably about the Big Dipper, this constellation that's near the North Pole. And basically, the center here would symbolize the North Celestial Pole, basically the point in the sky around which slowly all the other stars turn. And because the Big Dipper is really close to this North Celestial Pole, it can be seen to be moving around slowly. So it can be captured sometimes in 4 legs, sometimes 3, like on the flag of the Isle of Man. So this is really interesting. He's also looked at different stones, and especially the markings on stones. Let me see if I can show you here. He's looked at different stones. Like he's interpreted these stones also in Stonehenge. And some of the most important markings he found had been ignored by the team of archaeologists who was specifically working on these and decoding them. I mean, his ideas were actually very, very interesting, the way he put it all together. And again, here we have a close-up of one of these with the Big Dipper. This is, I think, Normanton Down. So that's a really good example of an archaeologist who's actually got a really interesting alternative view.
What's his name again? Sorry, Melissa.
Oh, Stefan Mader. Yeah, I'll go
Stefan Mader.
Yeah, here we are.
Is he on your channel?
Oh yeah, I did. I interviewed him back in this January, I think it was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
this is Stonehenge of the Starry Sky. Another, I mean, there are so many, but another really interesting one is recently I mentioned Quentin, the French researcher. He did some really interesting work on some dolmens in these massive standing stones that they have in Brittany, and he found that there were some really interesting distances between the stones. Let me see if I can show you that one. So hang on a sec. There's just a quick screenshot here of a film he made. He actually made a really sophisticated film. He got help from a filmmaker to make it. It's called Arpenteur du Néolithique. It's really good. It's on YouTube. And he found that just this one particular alignment among many with these dolmens, and there's this continuing square root of 10 thing going on, which he interprets. And but just the very fact that it's there, and you really can't deny it's there. Howard Crowhurst was, I think, the first to really think about this sense of double squares, triple squares, and the angles involved and the various ratios involved. So if you have a triple square, the diagonal is going to measure the square root of 10, and that's what he's finding then between these dolmens, which is really interesting. I mean, there are so many really interesting things going on in terms of research at the moment with the megaliths. What were the other places you mentioned? Avebury.
And Silbury Hill, yeah.
And Silbury Hill. Silbury Hill, I can't remember just now, but Avebury, a really interesting thing that comes to mind is actually just the positioning of Avebury. And John Michel mentioned, and also Matt last week, that it is placed at a particular point on the Earth, which tells us that the Earth was divided into 7 regular divisions long ago. And together with other evidence, especially from reading ancient meteorology figures and looking at the systems that are involved in creating these units of measure from the ancient world, that the Earth was accurately measured and surveyed in the Neolithic. Now, that's also a very controversial idea, unfortunately, but the evidence, I think, is really good. And there are a good few people working on that. And Avebury, just by its position, shows that, because it's really, really precise. And there are a good few units of measure also that seem to imply a division of the polar meridian into 7 or 14 or maybe 28 parts, depending on how you look at it. So that's also really, really interesting, just the positioning.
Brilliant. Okay, right. So, Melissa, it would seem to me that at the time when these amazing sites were built around the globe, there must have been communication. Hello, it's done that.
Have I done something? Oh,
no, it's probably me. Don't worry. Yeah, I was just saying, when all these megalithic structures were going up around the globe, there must have been some form of communication between various cultures that were building these structures. So, is that idea accepted by academics and orthodox historians?
as far as I know, no. So the fact that there are pyramids on every continent, similar types of myths, almost identical stories. And actually, the American researcher David Warner Matheson comes to mind. He's done a load of stuff on comparing myths, but also Joseph Campbell before him. But David Warner Matheson compared them specifically to prove that these are all connected. Another guy who's actually brilliant, he passed away recently, is Gavin Menzies. Now, again, very controversial, but he had a little bit of money behind him and he had a team of researchers, and he was able to show that the Americas were populated by the Chinese a long time ago, and shown a lot of connections between China, so modern day Taiwan, but also I think a little bit further up the coast. And in particular Peru. Peru is a Chinese name. It actually apparently translates as mist, because it doesn't actually rain in Peru, it's just mist comes down. Anyway, he looked at so many angles, from bacteria shared to the art. As far as I know, none of this is accepted in conventional mainstream academia. And the earliest exchange, for example, especially across the Atlantic, that's accepted would be St. Brendan. And even at that, it's a little bit sort of iffy. I'm not sure how widely accepted that is, that St. Brendan crossed from Ireland over to Newfoundland, or maybe a little bit before further. Then, of course, there's the Vikings as well. I think that is pretty much accepted now. And there's the Vinland saga. But that's very recent. That's very, very recent. Oh, hang on a second. I just remembered there's also, now that there is something in in mainstream academia about the arrowheads that were found both in prehistoric France and in the east coast of America. So I think there was something about that. Now, I don't know how well that's gone down, but there was something about that the way that the arrowheads were chipped away, this is back to the Neolithic, they were identical in some of the eastern states of the United States. So that's interesting. That goes back to the Neolithic. I think it's interesting that there are megalithic structures very similar to the ones on the Atlantic coast, on our side of the Atlantic here, over in America, and also on Pico Island that Matt mentioned, I think last week, in the Azores. There's like megalithic structures. How can that be? There are megalithic tombs, and also so on the coast in the US. What does that tell us? I don't know.
Fascinating stuff. Wow. And China, or Chinese people in Peru, and naming the country, I've never come across that.
I love that by Gavin Menzies. There are two of his that I have. They're so interesting. Really, really good.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, right. Just have a quick break for a minute, Melissa. I'm just going to go through a few comments.
Yeah.
If you've got any questions for Melissa, please put them in capital letters so I can distinguish them from the other comments. I've already seen quite a few. This one's funny. Well, good. Thanks to you also for a good chat, Jeremy Paxman. I mean, Paul Smith. Yeah, Jeremy Paxman, that's the guy on Newsnight, isn't it? He goes, yes, a lot. So I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you very much. Right. Merlin's boy. The establishment let in Darwin under heavy protest and coercion, in my understanding. The establishment have taken a line of never again. Darwin had a theory and a few quid and a nutter as a backer. Okay. He was, by today's standards anyway, quite a strange person, I believe. Here's a question that's almost in capitals. Well done, or Gulag. Melissa, in relation to the Stonehenge blue stones, does Melissa believe the stones got there by human transportation or by glaciation?
Human transportation. I was there last week. I was in the Brazili Hills.
Oh, right. I thought you meant you were there at the time when they were moving the stones.
Yeah, no, I was also there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I saw them do it. I was thinking about this because I was walking around there and I was wondering. No, I'm not a technical person. I'm not an engineer. I think there are some good ideas, but no, absolutely, they were taken by people. I mean, look, it probably involved water. It probably involved some engineering, some cranes. I don't know how they did it, but I mean, yes, of course they did it. You know, and this is the idea that's central to forbidden archaeology in a sense. It's like, well, they couldn't have done it because obviously they didn't know how, so that's the proof. You know, it's a very circular argument. They didn't know how, they couldn't have done it, so it probably came here naturally. Now, of course, the stones could have been, taken over naturally, but it's very curious how there are so many just in that circle, and then also in the Brazili Hills.
Okay, so you say that the stones could have been transported. Did you say naturally was the word you used?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. And I think that when we even ask the question, we're presuming that there's some kind of problem with the engineering capabilities of the Neolithic people.
What do you make of sound technology being involved? I know it's a very exotic theory,
Yeah.
if you like, but I mean, we've seen in recent years that we can move objects using sound.
Mm.
And clearly, the ancients were very clued up when it came to science. So, do you think that's a plausible explanation?
Yeah, I've heard really interesting things. There's that South African guy as well has been working on sound, and the what's his name?
Tellinger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's this idea that with the Moai on Easter Island, there are stories about them having been moved with sound. I don't know. I just don't know, but I wouldn't discount it. I mean, like, look, if you could say that, how was that hole dug in the road yesterday? It involved sound. Yes, it also involved diggers, but maybe that's just half the story. That something produced a sound, but actually there was machinery there. It doesn't have to be like magical, and you don't have to dismiss it as just magic, or just supernatural. Maybe there was some technology that we don't know about, but maybe the sound was associated with some machinery as well that we don't understand. Merlin, I think, is said to have brought the stones from Stonehenge over with some kind of, was it sound magic or was it just some other magic? I don't know, but I think what the word magic here tells us to an extent is that the technology wasn't understood by later people.
Okay. I know Geoffrey of Monmouth talks about Merlin and the stones. I'm trying to remember now. I do remember that he mentions that people bathed in the stone's water, which I found quite a cryptic comment, until I spoke to Maria Wheatley, who said that one of the stones was producing water up until about 1950 something.
Yeah,
and when they couldn't find the source, they concreted it up.
Yeah, so this again, it's like we don't understand it, we'll get rid of it.
Exactly. Okay. Question here from Merlin's boy. Talking to Merlin, here he is. Is there such a course as astroarchaeology in any UK university?
I don't know of one.
Okay.
I don't think so. There are archaeoastronomers working in universities. Clive Ruggles is one, and there's another in Spain, and I think they produced a report recently for the UN. So they are being listened to, but Clive Ruggles is very quick to dismiss most theories about astronomy. He's not a big fan of Alexander Thom or Gerald Hawkins. I didn't mention Gerald Hawkins. He's the astronomer who first started to think about Stonehenge as a computer, as an analog computer, and in terms of astronomy. And he worked together with Thom. They corresponded. And it was actually Gerald Hawkins who gave Thom the idea to think about the moon. And then that's how we got the idea of lunar standstills. Anyway, as far as I know, it's just Clive Ruggles. And he basically accepts that the stones at Stonehenge mark the summer solstice and a couple of bits and pieces, but that's kind of it. I don't know if there's anything much more going on at the moment.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's just have a look at a comment made by Marshall Abrahams. If academia doesn't wake up and open its mind, it's going to find itself swept away by the torrents of independent research now coming into focus. That would seem to be the case. I think they do feel challenged, don't they, at the moment, and under a certain amount of pressure.
That's a really interesting part of this whole thing. So there's this attempt to dismiss independent researchers as, idiots, first of all, but also there's a sense of the esoteric being dangerous, undesirable, because it's all linked up to, like, in their minds. It's like this magic, and it's esoteric, and it's not serious. There's no proof. In fact, there's lots of proof, but that this is the image that this branch of research has. It's definitely, there's a sense of threat.
Okay. Scarab City has said South American Indians all look very similar to South Asians, and genetics also prove this. So that goes back to what you were saying earlier. Yeah, very interesting. So clearly people were, migrating and moving around the earth thousands of years ago. That would seem fairly evident, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay,
and
brilliant.
Thor Heyerdahl, we forgot to mention Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian explorer back in the 60s and 70s. He proved that it was possible to cross the Atlantic in a reed boat.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Let's talk about one of my favourite researchers of all time, John Anthony West. Now, do you think he was correct when he said that Egypt was a legacy culture rather than a culture that developed out of nowhere?
Absolutely. I have his book. Here we go.
I've not read that yet. Serpents in the Sky. Yeah, I still haven't read that.
Yeah, it's really good. It's actually a lovely format. Can I show you quickly? Because it's got pictures. But it's also got little notes on the side. Let me see. It's got little diagrams. It's really good. It's kind of like a one that you can dip in and out of, as well as reading cover to cover. Absolutely, it's a legacy. And this is the same conclusion that an 18th century astronomer came to in France. Bailly, his name is. Unfortunately, he got his head chopped off in the Revolution. Best of times, worst of times. But he came to the same conclusion. And I find that really interesting because obviously he's different time, different country. He wrote a book on the history of ancient astronomy. And the way in those days people were amazing. Like, on the one hand, he's a politician and he knows all these famous writers. On the other hand, he's doing all this incredible research. And reading through his book, unfortunately, it's not translated, but it is available online. He just kind of has, Plutarch and Titus Livius and all these people at the tip of his fingers. He has all these, like, they're so well read and they're incredible. So he basically, as an astronomer, a modern astronomer of his time, decoded the texts, and also there was a lot of traveling in his day, people going over to India and the Far East and Africa, and he was able to get reports from them about how astronomy was practiced there, especially India. And he came to the conclusion that it was so sophisticated what people were able to do. Like, for example, to know that the length of a year was exactly 365.256 days. I mean, this is like it takes generations and generations to know this. It's so, on the one hand, it was so sophisticated, cycles of 3,600 years, but also the really, really long Indian cycles, 864,000 years. Also, he found there were so many things in common between all the various so-called isolated traditions in Egypt, the Greeks, the Babylonians and the Chaldeans, the Indians, the Chinese. These are people he mostly looked at. There wasn't so much information yet coming from the Americas in his day. And he came to the conclusion that for him it was obvious there was one global, highly sophisticated scientific culture that preceded them all. Now, he didn't call it Atlantis. He does talk about Atlantis, and Atlantis isn't necessary for this argument. But the fact is, if you look at the astronomy that the people in around 3000 BC were capable of, it implies a very long history of astronomy and record keeping and observation, and it's very, very sophisticated. There's no way you could know that the Metonic cycle was 19 years in 19 years. No, it's just like but you need to take a step back and look at it from that point of view without that sort of hindrance of, oh, the ancestors were a bit, clumsy, didn't know how to count, and they obviously couldn't write, so they couldn't think. Then this idea of John Anthony West, it's a legacy, because this is the idea basically that Bailly had. It's a legacy. These people inherited bits and bobs from different, after various catastrophes, deluges, perhaps, meteorite strikes, who knows, climate change. And some bits survived and some bits didn't. And another thing Bailly was inspired by is that there was this guy called Le Gentil, who was a bit before his time. He didn't die in the French Revolution, he died naturally. But he was a bit before his time, and he was sent on an expedition to document the transit of Venus together with dozens and dozens of scientists. They were sent to the four corners of the world in the mid-18th century. And this guy went to Pondicherry in India. Unfortunately, he didn't make it in time because war broke out with the English and there was a storm and he missed it. So he stayed on an extra 8 years till the next transit of Venus. This is what people had to do in those days. But in that time, in those 8 years that he was stuck in India, he was talking to the Brahmins and trying to learn about their astronomy. And he realized that the systems were really sophisticated, but actually the people who were teaching him didn't really understand them. So it was inherited. It was something that had been inherited a long, long time ago, but they didn't really understand how it worked or what some of the numbers were for or about, these little, very kind of precise corrections that were in the tables he was shown and everything. So this is why Bailly came to the conclusion, the debris of a system. And this is exactly the same conclusion, basically, that John Anthony West came to. It's a legacy. And this is basically something that's carried Graham Hancock a lot in his writings, the sense of something that was there before and it's gone. This species with amnesia, as he says, I think that's really, really important. And this is the key idea that we have, many of us who are looking at the ancient world, especially if we're looking to the Neolithic. I mean, there's lots to discover in the independent sector in history anyway, But if we're looking to the Neolithic, this is a really central idea because it allows you to think about these ancestors as themselves being part of a long, long tradition, and they've inherited knowledge. And there's no reason that it should have suddenly begun, that is civilization, in about 5000 BC. And this was a very common view for a long time, probably still is. I know Kenneth Clark, who did this civilization series, which I think is really good, although it's a little dated now, I admit, but he did a series on Egypt. And like that, he just kind of states that civilization appeared in about, I don't know what he says, 3000 BC. It just suddenly appeared. But did it, though? It's definitely, I think, a legacy, but everyone can make their own mind up. But you have to look at the astronomy in particular and ask yourself, is it possible that they could have had this knowledge so suddenly?
Okay. So I take it that you're a definite believer in Atlantis.
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
But I wouldn't I wouldn't confine myself to just one theory because there actually are some really good ones out there. So I don't know. For example, I love Matt's theory. Personally, I think it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, so beyond Gibraltar. And then there are a couple of other really good spots. There's, the Matt mentioned in the Bahamas, and then Rand Flemath and Colin Wilson they wrote a book called The Atlantis Blueprint. So for them, it was in Antarctica. I think there are so many places that are now submerged. So it's very hard to know which is the Atlantis of Plato. But I have no trouble believing that there was a high civilization, that there was a catastrophe. Was it an actual continent in the sense that we understand continent, or perhaps a large island? Could it have been a section of the States? Could it have been an island near the Azores? Now, to be honest, I personally like Matt's theory a lot, because there are lots of reasons why his location fits in terms of the world grid, in terms of it's not too far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, so it's kind of believable for Greece. Yes, so I have no problem believing in this myth of Plato's, also for the reason that when Plato talks about this myth, it's in order to prove a point. He doesn't say, oh, and we must use our imaginations. Plato hates imagination. He hates art. He hates like things that aren't real and true. He's all about truth. I don't think it would make sense to interpret his story as some kind of falsification, because that's what all Plato's about. I don't think he's all into, like, he even kind of like looks down on artists because like he's painting a chair rather than picking up an actual physical chair. So there's like this element of like untruth. You know, he's not into deceit. I don't think he's into being vague, yeah, but he's not into deceit.
Okay, well, I've been following a chap called Robert John Langdon on YouTube very recently. I'm quite new to his information, but he suggests very strongly that Atlantis was Doggerland.
Yeah, I mean, that's another sunken land.
Yeah, I mean, I had Dr. Stephen Pidgeon on a few episodes ago, and he believes that Doggerland was submerged only around 400 AD. So there's, you know, a big gulf in opinions on when Doggerland was submerged. But I've always thought of Atlantis myself as a continent rather than an island, that it covered a large area, which would explain why you've got pyramids under the sea off the tip of West Cuba. You've got a big site, something going on in the Azores. And of course, you've got the Atlantic Ocean. I mean,
and the Atlas Mountains. The Atlas Mountains are on that right side of Morocco, just over there.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Actually, Bailly, the same guy, I'm a big fan. He talks about this Atlantis and Atlas, and not in relation to, actually, funny enough, this lost civilization necessarily. Although he does connect them, but he doesn't depend. Like, he doesn't make the idea of a lost civilization depend on the story of Atlantis. But he does talk about it, and it's interesting as well, because already he's kind of thinking, oh, Atlas, Atlantis, yeah,
exactly, yeah.
This is before we knew about Doggerland, of course.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, when I was looking into the history of St. Michael's Mount, I read it. No, it wasn't medieval. It was maybe 17th or 16th century text talking about how the locals around the bay in Cornwall were still finding like doors and trees under the water from some time before it was submerged. Oh, that reminds me as well. The Bishop of Avranches in France, he was around. So he's like 8th century or 7th century. He says in his story of how he founded his first church on the Mont Saint-Michel, he says that there was a tsunami, and that before that the Mont Saint-Michel wasn't an island, and it was only after that. So he interpreted this as kind of divine providence, and St. Michael was speaking to him. But that tsunami must have happened as well. So
yeah, very interesting. Merlin's boy has asked, how many references on antiquity are there to Atlantis apart from Plato? Do we have any other?
I don't know.
No, I'm not sure.
I think there are references to Atlas in relation to Atlas as a real person, not necessarily just a titan and an imaginary guy. Atlas. Oh, I'm not sure.
No, sorry.
Maybe Matt would know, or Hugh, maybe.
Hugh Evans will probably know if Hugh's still watching. Okay. Right. Okay. So, sorry.
I don't think there are many, if any. I think it's just
Plato,
but it's in 2 books. It's Timaeus and Critias, I think.
Yeah, there's one other reference that's in the back of my mind somewhere that I just can't recall at the moment. I think there might be one other one.
Mm.
Okay, let's just go back to astronomy for a moment, Melissa. So, what's your favourite example of a megalithic site that has incorporated astronomy into its dimensions? If you had to pick one site that really was a great example of that, what would you pick?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to choose, actually, because in particular, one of my favorite researchers is Robin Heath,
Mm-hmm.
and he's done work on Stonehenge as well as some sites in Brittany. But I would probably say, like, just to keep it simple, one of my favorite discoveries of his is his lunation triangle in relation to Stonehenge. Maybe I can just share my screen again. Hang on.
Please.
Just really quickly, without going into too much detail. Which one am I on? Here we are. So this is just a diagram that I did up based on his discoveries. First of all, I don't have the plan of Stonehenge on this particular image, but this is basically a triangle that Robin Heath drew between some stones on the largest circle in Stonehenge. It's not the big the tall standing stones that are the most famous. It's a larger circle, the Aubrey Circle, and on this circle there are some key stones referred to as the station stones. In fact, two are missing, but the posts are still there, and these four stones form a 5-12 rectangle. That particular type of rectangle produces a diameter of 13. And one thing that's interesting about this kind of triangle, if you're going to halve it, is that 12 and 13 are the two options if you're going to count the number of moons in a year. And so he documented this in his book, Lost Science, that he co-wrote with John Michell a long time ago, but it's a brilliant, brilliant book. And he found that if you then draw a line linking the 2/3 part of the 5 side with the opposite angle, the measure of that line, if you're going to give 12 and 13 to the other two, is 12.369, which is pretty much exactly the mean number of lunations in a year. So there's this big problem when you're trying to design a calendar of how the fact is. So the year, as we think of it, the solar year, is 4 seasons, is 365 days, or 366 if you're thinking about calendars, but it's basically 365 days. The lunar year is 354 days, or 355 to round it up, and they don't fit. And if you're just tracking the months in terms of the actual moon that you can see in the sky, going through its cycles 12 or 13 times a year, it just never fits with the solar year. So it's really good to know how to divide up the year so that you can keep on track with these two cycles. And so the fact that this number is so useful and can be connected to geometry so simply is really, really amazing. And he's actually found lots of other things and similar geometry then in Brittany. But I think this is probably the single most amazing thing that he's found. And it's this idea that geometry connects with astronomy in a very simple way, and it connects with the site, and you can measure it and it's there. But you have to be able to give the credit or be open to the idea that our ancestors weren't idiots. And then what's really nice about this particular one as well is that the angle created by this 5, 12, 13 triangle also suggests, because it's very similar, 22.5, also suggests an octagon, so that you can draw an octagon within this big station stone circle, if you like, the Aubrey Circle. And what's significant about that is that the octagon is associated with Mother Earth. 8 is Venus, a number associated with Venus. Sometimes it's thought of as sort of a 2 squares, sort of one like this and one sort of like that. So you have these 8 corners. And this is a pattern that we find in basilicas and churches, often mausoleums and baptistries. It's a really important symbol to do with life and death. So there's then symbolism as well, and all through this geometry.
Fascinating. Okay. I did not know about that, so I'll be checking that out. Robin Heath's lunation triangle. Brilliant stuff. He's let's have, oh blimey, look. It's happened again. There we are. Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, he's a great speaker as well. Have you ever watched him give a talk? Yeah, and he's quite a funny chap as well. So yeah, I should be reaching out to him in the near future, see if I can get him on. I've had a very good comment going back to Atlantis. What does that name say? Orwell's Bud, the told you so guy. Brilliant. Diodorus Siculus mentions Atlantis from the Egyptian mythology point of view.
Ah, right.
I think I've heard of that name before. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think by you point him, actually, come to think of it. Yeah.
The Merlin's boy said Robin Heath has done some great work in and around the Preseli Hills.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say that bit about the Preseli Hills, because that particular triangle then can be blown up, as in made bigger, not destroyed, to link Stonehenge to the Isle of Lundy, and then the Preseli Hills, the spot where the stones come from, and it exactly matches the proportions. And Lundy's on the exact same latitude as Stonehenge, and then in the middle, at the very point, that 2/3 point that I was talking about, is Corley Island.
Amazing. Okay. All just coincidences, you know. Brilliant stuff. Okay. Right. So who are the best alternative researchers out there in your opinion, Melissa? I've recently spoken to two engineers, Matt Apocalypse and Graham Hancock, who've done some incredible research on our ancient ancestors. Maria Wheatley is another one, particularly her research on British megalith sites. So who do you kind of hold up there and revere and say, you know, these people are?
I have to say, even though in the independent scene we don't have this system of peer review and all that, I don't know of anyone in the independent sector who isn't any good. I think there's amazing work being done. And as far as I know, everyone who puts something out on academia or some other website, but a lot of it's on academia, there's some incredible stuff. I've got a few books here. I just went and had a look at the bookshelf, and I just not everyone writes books, and you don't have to. But obviously we have John Anthony West. But I've just got a few more to show. I've got Hugh Evans here.
Hooray!
Really, really cool. And I've got Marshall. This is really fantastic.
Hooray!
Now we haven't really talked about John Michel.
No.
But he is very, very important.
And John Mill. Yeah.
The book that he wrote actually with Robin Heath is really good. That's another John Michel. Now, going back to Robin Temple, absolutely. This is the thing. Once you start naming people, we're going to forget someone.
True, yeah.
This guy, or these two guys, if you like. There's a lot going on in France, although this goes back to the 60s. This is all about looking at alignments in ancient Greece. This is completely forgotten about. In fact, it was these guys who first discovered that Michael line going between supposedly Israel and Skellig Michael. And I know, Marshall, you've mentioned a line as well that goes in that direction. Gerald Hawkins, you were forward and on this. Oh, Petrie is my pin-up.
What's that book called by Atkins?
Sorry. This is Stonehenge Plans, Description and Theories. Now, this is the original Flinders Petrie book. This is the first thing he went and surveyed and measured before he went up to measure in Giza. And then this was reissued with a foreword by Gerald Hawkins. He's the first guy who started looking at Stonehenge as a computer.
Yeah, I've got one of his books. I just haven't read it yet.
Yeah, so that goes back to the 60s. Another really, really important one is my tattered copy, Berryman, Historical Metrology. A study of metrology will tell you that measures were systematic, precise, and linked to the size of the Earth. Quentin, French guy.
Is that translated at all?
No, sorry.
Oh.
But he's fantastic. He's got a big YouTube following, but he's also a really good researcher, like in his own right, and he hosts these conferences. He's fantastic. Swallow the Lubitz, the guy who inspired
John Anthony West. Yeah.
John Anthony West.
Yeah. That's supposed to be quite a dry read, isn't it? From what I've heard.
Look, you have to go through the dry read sometimes. Hugh Newman, and also John Martineau. I couldn't find my copy of it's a bit shiny there. This is Hugh Newman.
Yeah, unfortunately. I can see that. I don't think I've come across that one before. I've got his Giants of Stonehenge book.
In fact, it's related to what we were saying about Avebury and the I can't show you now, but here we are. Global positioning. Avebury being at the 7th point. Oh, actually, look, there's something about octagons. I was talking to you about octagons. Here we go. Anyway, he's fantastic. The lovely John Neal.
Oh, of course. All done with mirrors.
All done with mirrors.
Ancient metrology. I've got those as well.
Yeah. Smoke and mirrors, I might say.
Mine is signed, by the way.
Howard Crowhurst.
Yes, I need to get into some Howard Crowhurst.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I've got an Irish person here. There aren't too many. Anthony Murphy.
Okay, not come across him.
He's very good. Jeff Barth. He's measured all these stone circles. He's really into Alexander Thom, and he's measured hundreds of circles, but himself, not just taking Thom's work, and he's done all the stuff. Wilson and Blackett. Marshall, I was at a site last week in the village of Nevin in Pembrokeshire, and
you went to Nevin.
Yes,
really?
Wilson and Blackett. That was on Hugh Evans's recommendation.
Did you see the cross and the cave?
Yeah. We went there. It was funny actually. We went up, we couldn't quite, when we knew it was around, but a local man who was tidying his garden said, "Oh, come on, I'll show you where it is." And he gave us the whole story and all about the paranormal stuff that's been going on there, and the cave that's behind, and there's been walled up, and the knight that's buried inside. Amazing. Yeah, Anthony Murphy is really cool. And he was amazing. He said that like some psychic people had been there and they got really powerful readings. And
I've seen Adam Griffith of Britain's Hidden History. He's doused outside the entrance to that cave, or where it's bricked up. And each time he walks past,
really,
yeah, every time. So
see, all that kind of passes me by. I don't have those connections, there's some people just are really in tune. I don't have all that.
Have you ever tried dowsing before?
No, but I mean, I know I'd be rubbish. I'm like, do you know that story, the film with Gérard Depardieu, the 1980s film, the one with the hunchback?
Yes, I know the one you mean.
Yeah, and he goes around looking for water on his land, and nothing works. That would be me.
Okay. I do remember that John of Tadley was watching this. I think it was his first experience of dowsing, and he was at one of the sites in Wales where King Arthur died.
Right.
And I don't think he knew particularly about where he was dowsing, but anyway, he actually the rods guided him to the exact spot where Arthur was supposed to have died, confirmed by Lawrence Main at the time. So I'm sure you'd be good at it if you gave it a try. I think you just need to have an open mind.
I know my limits. No, I'm sure I wouldn't, but I totally respect people who can do that. I think that's incredible. I mean, there are people who are just in tune. I have a friend who showed me ghosts of her dead dogs. I mean, there are people who are amazing. I just don't have that. In terms of academia, there are people publishing on academia who haven't necessarily put books out, but they are absolutely incredible. Stephen Dale, he is so knowledgeable on metrology, historical metrology. Jim Allison. People know Jim Allison because of this line of sites that is quite well known now. Have you heard of this? Linking sites from Peru to Giza to Easter Island and a load between Petra, and they're all within, I think, 100 kilometers or so on this band that goes right around the Earth, and he found that and documented that.
Well, it sounds quite similar to Matt Apocalypse last week.
So basically Jim Allison started that. So he was the first one to find this band, and then it was taken up then by a filmmaker called Patrice Pouillard, who made the film The Revelation of the Pyramids, which was on YouTube. It's now come down off YouTube.
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, so basically now Jim Jim Allison isn't actually credited in that film for that work, which is a shame, but it's Jim Allison who found it. So he's done a lot of work with Stephen Dale. They work on a lot on the Graham Hancock message board. There are loads of people like this. Jim Wakefield, I interviewed him. He's the Australian guy. He's done some amazing things. John Bosack, an American researcher on historical metrology as well. And then other people doing work on metrology, like David Kenworthy. So he's from up north. He's fantastic. He's done so much work. People doing work on, say, Giza and looking at Google Earth. Dennis Payne. He's not too far from you, I don't think, down in the south by the Thames. In Douglas, like so many names I could give you, and they don't necessarily mean anything to anyone because they're really just on academia. Or Richard Heath as well, Robin Heath's brother, Larry Powell. So yes, there are very, very many fantastic independent researchers, and they're really knowledgeable, often engineers. Absolutely. So yes, hail the engineers. I think like it's just such an incredible group of people.
Just going back to books as well, Marshall's reminded us of Robert Temple's The Serious Mystery and Knight and Lomax's Uriel's Machine.
Yeah. I know I have those books on my Kindle. I couldn't show you them, but fantastic. Knight and Lomax, and also that Butler, Alan Butler.
Brilliant. Okay.
I see Hamish Miller. Yes, The Serpent and the what's it called? Yes, really good.
So just to finish up, Melissa. Going back to forbidden archaeology, what do you think it would take for modern academia to start taking alternative ideas seriously?
I think it would take a generation to grow up and bring new ideas to the table. Having said that, John Michel wrote his most influential books in the 60s and 70s. And they're still on the margins. Now, maybe he's too strongly associated with certain other aspects of culture that have unfortunately withered away, that were maybe a bit more freer than us. And then the whole thing, he was interested in UFOs and crop circles. And maybe that's just too far out, to use the 60s term. But I hope a generation and YouTube and people looking at these things would change the course of mainstream eventually. I mean, that's usually how it goes, isn't it? I mean, these things crop up in terms of sociology. These ideas crop up, or types of music, and then they get sucked in by the mainstream. Like, think about rap. It happens first of all in these neighborhoods, and then next thing you know, it's in the charts. Okay,
grassroots, and then it's co-opted. Exactly right. Yeah, it's a very good comparison. I totally agree with that.
So, but then we have the example of John Michel, and he's still on the margins. So I'd be interested to know what other people think, actually, because I'm very hopeful that there's going to be so much interesting stuff coming out of the independent sector, if you like. But then there are also very influential people trying to rubbish this whole thing, if you like. And Wikipedia is one of those, with Jimmy Wales. Everything is pseudo, and if you call something pseudo, it's about enforcing the orthodoxy. It's about exercising power. It's a shortcut to avoid intellectual engagement. If an idea is difficult or challenging, maybe there are concerns about methodology because, we are all working on our own. We're not part of a university. Maybe there are concerns about, typos, and then the books are being published without being peer reviewed. But that's exactly, you can't blame independent people for being in that position. That's what you are. You're independent. But this pseudo label is very powerful. I think a lot of people take it seriously. It's kind of seen as a kind of a protective mechanism, or also maybe a type of atropaic magic. I'm doing this with my hands, stay away. Pseudo science, pseudo history. What is pseudo history? I mean, when you think about it, it makes no sense. A story is a story. You have to have something in your story. A pseudo history doesn't even make sense. I mean, the accuser, because it is an accusation, is implying that their position is backed by the authority of true knowledge. Again, something that doesn't make sense, and the other position lacks authority. And the pseudo label is like a gatekeeping tool. You're in or you're out.
Totally.
And there's real and there's false.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a term with very little meaning or validity, really. It's very
Exactly.
much like the term conspiracy theorist. Now,
Yeah.
there are some wild conspiracy theories out there, don't get me wrong, but that term, as I understand it, and I've looked into it, it was originally created by the CIA when people started asking questions about the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
Which were
And then we
very,
have Watergate, and in that amazing film.
Yeah, they were asking very rational questions, about
Yeah.
the assassination based on witness reports of people who were there and saw things and heard things that weren't, part of the official story.
Yeah. But
So
this is not JFK. This is not Watergate. And this is about knowledge as well. I mean, can knowledge only be derived through scientific methods? Does it have to be something that is provable? What are the scientific methods themselves doing? Are they sufficient for understanding certain kinds of knowledge? Why this obsession with science? Because actually there are very real limits to science. And where does this constant labeling of others as pseudo history, pseudo archaeology, where does it leave you? Or where does it leave the scientific establishment? Basically, it's not actually very helpful.
Well, they're suggesting that our ancestors that built these monuments were howling barbarians and savages, if you like, but their temples and their constructions are a complete contradiction to their reading of them as people. So yeah, I just think it's completely crazy.
Yeah, the howling barbarians is an actual quotation from a book by an archaeologist. So I think when people see that, and also perhaps, when you see recreations of people trying to build Stonehenge on TV, they have uncombed hair and they wear like rubbish bare like cloths, and it just makes them look stupid, So then you kind of internalize this. It's literally a hair and makeup thing. It's just one more nail in the coffin, and it's very hard to get beyond these ideas that you don't even realize that you're being spoon-fed these notions, and then next thing you know, it's like, it doesn't fit. Why does it not fit? And I think as well, this idea that our ancestors were idiots and they didn't comb their hair is directly related to this idea of the aliens having built these things. That this is a very popular idea. That's nothing to do with UFO sightings, whether they're true or not, and I'm sure they are. But this idea that the aliens built Stonehenge and the pyramids because they can't accept that actually humans, the very same people as us, the very same brains and abilities, could have done it.
Well, I suppose in a way there's very little actual evidence for Atlantis, for a culture that goes back, say, I don't know, before Göbekli Tepe.
I disagree.
Go on then. Go on then.
There is evidence, because if you look at the astronomy, if you look at the metrology, all things that you can take directly from the stone circles, directly from the dolmens. And there's more as well. I mean, if you look at, say, the work of Gavin Menzies looking at the contacts between people in the ancient world, that's something else again. But all you have to do is look at a stone circle and measurements, and look at the pyramids, measure. And I mean, that is the evidence. That it's not necessarily written in a book. And yes, understandably, prehistory is about the world before the written word, but the evidence is there.
Absolutely. Brilliant stuff. Melissa, I could listen to you all night long. You're an amazing source of knowledge. I've really enjoyed tonight. Thank you so much for coming on with me, and especially at short notice. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
It's been absolutely unbelievable. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's made so many comments this evening, so many questions. It's been brilliant. Sorry I couldn't get them all up on the screen, but yeah, thanks very much for that. Next week is the return of Marshall Abrahams.
Yay.
And we're going to take a sneaky look at her new book, Finding the Phoenix. I'm very excited about that. So that's the usual time of 7 o'clock next Sunday. Please like, share and subscribe and hit the notification bell and all that stuff. Thanks for watching. See you next Sunday. Cheers, Melissa.
Thank you, Paul.